Last week, I posted a question on Instagram and I asked my followers whether they knew that depression wasn't the result of a chemical imbalance in the brain. The options were yes, I know, and blasphemy. When nearly 100% of my respondents answered blasphemy, I knew that I could potentially get into some trouble. So I want to just take the time to clarify something. Obviously, if you know me, you know I'm not a medical professional, I'm not a scientist, I'm a content creator who feels like she has a personal stake in this subject matter. I've been through depression multiple times in my life. I've spent almost a fifth of my life on antidepressants, and I've even been hospitalized for my depression. So I don't want anybody coming at me and saying that I don't have compassion for people who are genuinely suffering. In fact, it's because of this compassion that I've long pondered the origins of depression, because something about the depression narrative, the chemical imbalance theory, something about it, that narrative has never really sat well with me. There was something about that story that was incomplete. And so when I did the research for this video, I was absolutely surprised to find what I found. In over 30 years of research, there has not been a single shred of evidence that has validated the claim that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. It was the theory that never was, and quite a brilliant one at that. Because if you tell people that their depression is a result of a chemical imbalance in the brain, then you can then sell to them a pill that promises to restore that balance. That's exactly what the pharmaceutical companies did. They marketed to us, they sold to us, and then eventually the story that they told started to take on a life of its own. In this video, we're going to look at how one of the greatest lies in modern history came to be. But first, if you're new here, please consider subscribing, because I make videos like this at least once a week, and I would love to be able to continue to do so. In 1952, researchers discovered that a drug used in the treatment of tuberculosis also made patients more cheerful, active, and social. This drug, called iproniazid, worked by inhibiting the monoamine oxidase enzyme, which breaks down serotonin and dopamine, which are important neurotransmitters involved in pleasurable emotions. In 1958, iproniazid was approved for use as an antidepressant, but was withdrawn in the 1960s when it was discovered that the drug also caused liver damage. To explain why iproniazid worked as an antidepressant, some scientists started speculating. Since higher levels of serotonin in the brain could lead to an elevated mood state, surely it must follow that lower levels of serotonin in the brain were the cause of depression in the patient. And therein lies the chemical imbalance hypothesis, a hypothesis that has not been validated by any credible scientific research. However, this didn't stop the US pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly from running with the story. In the 1970s and 80s, they developed a new class of antidepressants that worked specifically to boost levels of serotonin in the brain, which they called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. In 1987, the first SSRI came to market under the brand name Prozac, and by 1995, it had generated $2 billion in sales worldwide. Since the discovery of SSRIs, there have been no major advancements in commercial drug treatments for depression. The antidepressants that came after Prozac have been minor variations of the same thing, and it's not because SSRIs work so well that there hasn't been a need to innovate. Anybody who has suffered from the side effects of SSRIs will tell you how uncomfortable they can be. Not to mention, withdrawing from antidepressants can often present challenges that often feel worse than the challenges of being depressed itself. In the mid-1990s, Harvard professor Irving Kirsch began taking a closer look at the research on antidepressants. He and his colleagues used the Freedom of Information Act to acquire unpublished trial results from the FDA for 6 antidepressants. What they found was that the studies published by pharmaceutical companies had been systematically manipulated in order to get their drugs to market. When Kirsch and his colleagues averaged the results of both published and unpublished trials, of which there were many, they found that the drugs produced a clinically insignificant improvement in mood compared to a placebo. Kirsch's subsequent studies revealed very similar findings, with an exception for the observation that antidepressants seemed to work slightly better than a placebo for patients in the upper end of the severely depressed category. So in other words, Kirsch found that antidepressants do seem to work, but for a very small minority of severely depressed patients. And it seems like pharmaceutical pharmaceutical companies were taking this one case of improvement and extrapolating it across to apply to the general population. From this, you can imagine that in the long run, for a majority of individuals on antidepressants, at best, they will see no noticeable improvement of their condition, and at worst, they will suffer serious side effects from their medications. In 2017, 12.7% of the US population was on antidepressants, compared to only 7.7% in 1999 and 2002. So in other words, the rate of Americans on antidepressants has skyrocketed in the last 2 decades. So what's going on here? If antidepressants don't work as well as pharmaceutical companies claim them to be, how did they come to be so popularly prescribed? At a very high level, this seems to be the case. Pharmaceutical companies spend millions of dollars to conduct independent studies. They use these studies for FDA approval to get their drugs to market. They also pay to get these studies published in respected medical journals. They then heavily invest in marketing to doctors and mental health professionals to the tune of billions of dollars, citing their newly published studies to substantiate their claims. And they spend billions of dollars, billions, in direct-to-consumer advertising to you, so that when you go to your doctor and ask to be put on an antidepressant, your doctor will know exactly what to do. Next question. How does a clinically insignificant drug get FDA approval? As a refresher, clinical significance refers to the practical importance of a treatment effect, whether that effect is real and noticeable and meaningful in the day-to-day life of the person who is on the drug. The answer, according to Kirsch, lies in an understanding of the approval criteria used by the FDA. From this, you can identify at least 3 loopholes. Number 1, the FDA doesn't consider clinical significance of results. Only statistical significance is considered. Statistical significance simply means that an effect is unlikely to have happened by chance, whether or not that effect is actually palpable in the lives of those affected by it. Number 2, all you need to do to get a drug approved by the FDA are 2 adequately conducted clinical trials that show a difference between the drug and the placebo. So that means in practice, you can fund as many trials as you want in search of your 2 winning clinical trials. And number 3, the FDA doesn't consider trials that show negative results. Now I want to share with you some direct quotes from other reputable experts. Dr. David Burns, adjunct professor emeritus of psychiatry at Stanford University, says in his best-selling book, Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy, "I reviewed the entire world literature on brain serotonin, but couldn't find one shred of compelling evidence that a deficiency of serotonin causes depression, anxiety, or any other psychiatric disorder. To this day, I'm still not aware of any studies that have ever validated the chemical imbalance theory." He also says, "This theory is fueled more by drug company marketing than by solid scientific proof. Billions of dollars of annual profits from the sale of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications are at stake, so drug companies spend vast amounts of money promoting the chemical imbalance theory." Dr. Ronald Pease, professor of psychiatry in the SUNY Upstate Medical University and editor-in-chief of the Psychiatric Times, calls the chemical imbalance theory a bogus theory and maintains that psychiatry as a profession has never endorsed it. Seeing abnormalities in a depressed person's brain does not necessarily mean the person's depression was caused by these abnormalities. It's conceivable that the person became depressed owing primarily to job loss or marriage breakup, which led secondarily to alterations in brain function. So this brings us to the question, if depression isn't caused by a serotonin deficiency or any chemical imbalance in the brain, what causes depression? The answer can be understood using a biopsychosocial model. In other words, by looking at a combination of biological, psychological, and social factors. I want to take this opportunity to clarify one thing. In this video, I have attempted to dispel the myth that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. This is not the same as denying the fact that depression has any biological roots at all. The truth of the matter is, some people can just be more genetically predisposed towards becoming depressed. And some people might be on certain medications where depression is a common side effect, or they could have hypothyroidism. Depression is a complex condition owing to a wide range of causes, sometimes in conjunction with one another. A chemical imbalance in the brain, however, is not one of those causes. In my future videos, I'm going to explain what some of the causes of depression are using the biopsychosocial model / spiritual. Hint, hint. And I'm really excited because now I feel like I've entered the territory where I am talking about subjects that truly aren't being discussed that much. And my goal is to be of help and to be of service to you guys. If you made it this far, please consider giving this video a like and leaving a comment down below, because I would love to know what you thought about this video. The links to my research can be found in the description box below, and I would highly encourage you to conduct your own research, because this video is meant to be a conversation starter and not the end all be all.